Hello, hello, and welcome back to DFT'S Dungeon. My name is Daniel Terry. I've got kind of a different episode for you guys today because when you're watching it, you might be like, this sounds an awful lot like Dan is on somebody else's show and not on his own. And you would be right. So a couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by Andrew Schwab, the vocalist of Project 86, and he invited me to come on to his podcast called Pale Writers, which is his Patreon podcast. And the reason that that is significant is because this is kind of one of those situations where if you know, you know. I'm just going to spoil it a little bit here at the beginning because in 2021, I released a video right here on YouTube. Some of you guys who are subscribed, that is probably the reason that you subscribed to this channel in the first place. And it was called We Need to Talk About Andrew Schwab and Project 86. And I went into about a half-hour tirade about things that I was upset with the band and things that I didn't like about Andrew and the way he was running his own band and things of that nature. And it led to a follow-up video. It led to some arguments between Andrew and myself. And for a lot of you guys, that was the last that you had heard about the situation. But what was actually happening behind the scenes is that Andrew and I were able to patch things up privately. And this is the first time that we've ever really talked about this publicly with anybody. So he was kind enough to let me upload this entire 2-hour conversation that we had to YouTube because it talks about a lot of that stuff. It talks about my original video. It talks about the controversy that we had. Andrew actually addresses some of the points that I had made in the original video and kind of gives his own perspective about the whole thing that went down. And I know 2 hours is a lot to ask for you guys, and I will admit this is a raw interview, so it's not going to be that visually interesting, but I would encourage you to listen to the whole thing because there's definitely a lot of really cool behind the scenes stuff in here. But the reason I think it's important that this conversation be out there is just to show that just because you have a disagreement with somebody or you may not share a particular worldview with them, that reconciliation is possible. And I would not want to have it any other way. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this conversation. I will be back very soon with a shorter video than this, but I really hope that you guys enjoy the things that Andrew and I had to talk about in this conversation.
Pale Riders, what's happening? Episode 221. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for always being a part of the P86 Omni Patreon. Today, I've got a surprise for everyone, and we're going to do something a little bit unorthodox here in light of the special guest that I have on today. We're going to split this episode into two halves, and I want to introduce a really, really cool guest that I've been wanting to have on for quite a long time, longer than he realizes. And it's my boy, Daniel Terry, host of, well, many different channels along the way, and podcaster, former podcaster, host extraordinaire. I want you to tell people what's been going on with you lately. And before I let you do that, I just want to wrap up my introduction with you. Longtime supporter of the band and really a representative of a lot of different types of P86 supporters over the years. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have him on here. He's been a part of the Patreon community for quite a while now. And we've been going back and forth during that time, just on private messages. And I just thought that he would be an amazing guest to have on today because he's also a podcast host. And I think we can really bat the ball back and forth here pretty well. So without further ado, Daniel Terry, thanks for joining me, my man.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's good to be here. I have to admit, that was one of the most surprising messages that I have gotten in a long time. You're like, listen, I've got this crazy idea. Let's have you on as a guest. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, I hope it's not
It's a trap.
No, it's not a trap. It's fine. We've been good for a long time.
So I'm going to tease this, and then I'm going to make you all wait because we're going to talk about it in detail later in the episode. But Daniel and I actually had a pretty dramatic falling out a few years ago, and it was surrounding the Drawing Black Lines anniversary live stream performance. And it was a pretty public falling out. Some of you guys might have been aware or privy to it. Maybe not. Most of you probably were not. I might have even mentioned it on our podcast. It's on my podcast at some point. Maybe not. I can't remember. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about it a little bit. Make sure we frame it in the right way later in the episode. But first, I'm going to wear the host hat, and then we're going to switch to Daniel wearing the host hat. I want to talk to you just as a longtime sort of follower, supporter of me, the music, the band. I want to talk to you a little bit about your perspective on things over the years and how Project evolved. And then first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about your connection to the new material, to Omni, parts 1 and 2. I listened to your reviews of the albums, both parts, and appreciate that. Those were really good reviews. They're really thorough and well thought out, well articulated. And I don't just say that because you like it. You know, I thought that
Sure.
even if you were critical of it, those were well thought out, well researched. That's what I like. Is if you give an opinion, at least have it be based upon, you know, data that's verifiable and not just, you know, conjecture on details. I get a lot of that. You know, sometimes I'll do interviews or jump on a show or podcast and they'll get all the details wrong. I don't correct them or anything, but
Right.
you know, it's always funny to hear people have these strong opinions on things. I'm like, well, actually, that situation is totally the opposite of what you are saying there. I try not to say too much, but it's the exception rather than the rule that someone is very well researched, and you are, and I appreciated that. So I guess my first question for you is, as a longtime Project fan and kind of running the full gamut of, you know, being, as I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, pretty connected to the older material. You know, most of the fans that have been with the band or with Project for a long time, there's a consensus out there, or a contingent, let me put it that way, that are very attached to like Drawing Black Lines, Songs from Broken Bridges by the older era OG lineup and such. There's a whole other crowd that are really attached to like Wait for the Siren and the later records, and obviously a lot of those folks have stuck pretty close by me here throughout the more recent records. But as someone who's been around for a while, how did you react to, and be brutally honest here, kind of the different sound on Omni before I kind of started explaining, hey, I really think this is a different band and idea now than Project traditionally. How did you react? Like, what was your first reaction?
I think that I was pretty surprised. I'm not going to lie. I was kind of like a lot of those people. If you look at the YouTube comments on like Metatropolis, I'm like a lot of those guys. Who's the guest vocalist? You know, who's doing this? Who's, you know, now I had inside baseball because I was part of the Patreon. So I had heard you saying things on your podcast about like, yeah, I thought I had this vocal nodule. Turns out I don't, you know? So like, I can absolutely swing for the moon on this, you know, if I want. And so like, I knew that the vocals were going to be different, but I hadn't heard, you know, any kind of like reaction. And so when I first heard it, my initial reaction was, and I'm not saying this just to make anybody happy, my first reaction, knowing what I knew going into it, I was like, this doesn't sound like Norma Jean at all, you know, because that's what everybody was like. I was like, no, this is a totally different beast.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, there was obviously a lot of attention put into avoiding that sound, you know, as much as possible. But I was absolutely blown away because when I heard it, I heard Meshuggah at first, which I'm, you know, a huge fan. I've been into that sort of genre, and it just wasn't what I was expecting at all. From something with Project 86 on the cover of it, right? Because the heaviest that I had heard up to that, you know, before that was Drawing Black Lines, and that is also, I will say, I know I said in my review that Omni is heavier than Drawing Black Lines, but they're so different that it's really hard to compare the two. It's two totally different types of energy. And so it blew me away, and I got very, very excited to hear the next song. So like every time a song would drop, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what's this one going to be? Is there going to be singing? Is there going to be a lot of dynamics? Because, and I was worried at first where I was like, oh my God, I hope this isn't an 11-track kill fest. Because like I love an 11-track kill fest, but a lot of the things that I like about Project 86 over the years I like that stuff too. So I want to hear, I want to hear the stuff that I expect from the band, but totally be open to that new stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it absolutely blew my mind the first time because I was like, oh my gosh, is he? And after listening to the song over and over and over again, I was like, no, that's him. There's no tampering. There's not really a whole lot of like unintentional vocal effects, if that makes sense. Like obviously with the electronic elements, there's going to be some electronics introduced into the
Sure.
vocals, but as far as the actual brutality of the screams, because I'm a meathead, I like screams, I like breakdowns, I like just ball busting heavy riffs.
Yeah, I'm in
And
the same boat.
yeah, I was not expecting that at all. Like, and so then I was like, oh man, this is really, really cool.
Well, I appreciate that, man, a lot, and thank you. Anytime you go a different route, it's risky. Uh, I felt a pretty strong conviction about it, though, for a really long time.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've mentioned this a lot lately on the podcast and on other interviews that I've done recently. Drawing Black Lines was the heaviest project record. And I think producer, band, engineer, everybody who was involved, mixer, was of one accord in wanting to make the thing that it became. So everybody sort of, when you're playing heavy music, you want the kick to line up with the bass guitar and the guitar so that when you hit together, it hits hard, right?
Yep.
It's got to be tight and locked in and of one accord. And there are moments where that vocal hits with the kick and the bass or the snare. You know what I'm saying? When all the instruments and the vocal are locking in together and doing the same thing for the same purpose, it hits way harder. And that was kind of what was happening on Drawing Black Lines. And then after that, I think the band just really was always sort of searching for an identity that sort of fit all the people that were involved that hit the same way, you know. And so there's a lot of experimentation, which is really fun, you know. But we always sort of landed in this like hard rock kind of world. And I remember as early as like Songs to Burn era, we're playing shows with, other bands that are heavier, you know.
Right.
And I'm going, the part of me is going, oh, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just that little bit of jealousy where it's like, because you just love that extreme, right? And so we were really extreme in 2000 for what was happening. But
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
but we weren't as soon as the next generation of heavy bands came along. We were no longer the heaviest thing out there. So we kind of went a more, I don't know, progressive, alternative rock route, whatever you want to call it. Point being, there was a long time that I kind of felt that thing whenever we would play shows or be on a festival or whatever, and there was heavier bands. I would watch them, my eyes would get big. I wish we could do that. I wish we could break down, like a real breakdown, or you know. So that sort of built up over time, and then the thing with the vocal was I actually started singing that way like a decade ago at the live show. It just
Yeah.
doesn't sound quite as jarring because it's live, And I started singing that way because it's a lot easier for me to make that sound than it is for me to do the patented Schwab shout. That actually requires a lot more effort and is the thing that causes me to like lose my voice. That was why I was having all those voice problems back in the day. Always
I
lost my
feel
voice
that
so bad, so
because in
bad.
my first band, I tried to sing like you. And then
Cool.
I was like, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't maintain this." Every local band in the world, they pick a band that they like, and then the vocalist tries to emulate their favorite vocalist the best that they can, and they get it
We all
right like
start that way.
maybe
I started
once.
that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I can still feel it. I can still remember what that feels like just right there in the vocal cord because you don't want your voice to break. You want it to sound strong and
So you have
commanding
to push
the
it
whole
harder.
time. Yeah. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh. It's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, when I do that people call it metalcore. It's funny, like I read comments too. Oh, when did they go metalcore? I'm like, I don't think it's metalcore, man. I don't hear many parts on our records, either of the Omni records, that I would call metalcore. But that's kind of a modern term for heavy, right? That's what
Yeah.
people mean, like the more guttural sounding vocal. When I sing that way, I don't get a headache. When I sing the way I normally sing or shout, I get a headache, like really
Yeah.
bad. So after recording sessions or like rehearsals, I'll always have this like splitting headache for like an hour.
Oof.
It's pretty miserable. So, and again, this is rehashed for people that have been listening for a while, but if you haven't, just trying to paint a picture here for why the shift. It was so refreshing to be in the studio and to not have a headache afterwards. But the music sounded way heavier,
Yeah.
which is really cool. And you brought up the Norma Jean thing. It's funny. Corey and I became friends during the pandemic, and he was going through some stuff a few years ago, and I reached out to him and said, "Yo, dude, I support you. I think some of the things you're going through are really a bummer, and if you need anything, let me know." And so we started talking more, and it came around to the time that I announced that we're going to do one more record as project. And I remember sending him a text. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Do you want to help? And he
Nice.
said, "Yeah, man, let's hop on a call." So I hopped on a call, and I was like, "Do you want to like sing on a song?" And he said, "Well, why don't we write a song?" I was like, "Okay, that's cool. Let's do it." And so we started working on some stuff, and then he was just like, "Why don't I just connect you with my dudes, Matt and the other guys?" And I was like, "Okay, but you know what people are going to say? As soon as people find out that like I'm going to catch heat for it being Norma 86,
Right.
I mean, I said it immediately." And he's like, "Well, then let's be intentional to not make it sound like that. And so that was the meeting that I had with all the dudes. I was like, "Look, I don't want this to sound like Schwab vocals over Norma Jean riffs.
Sure.
So if we can steer clear of that, and I'll give you guys plenty of ideas on how to avoid that.
Yeah.
I have a specific vibe that I'm going for here. Um, and if you just trust me on that and just be intentional about not doing that thing where it's like Schwab singing over Norma Jean riffs, then I think we're going to land at a pretty unique place, because those guys are all super talented. And I can tell you from sitting in a room with them and working on music together, like I said this, as a joke, but I meant it. I was like, "Oh man, I am definitely the least talented person in this room." You know? And I just kept saying that to them over and over again. But they're very, very capable of doing lots of different musical styles and incorporating all kinds of different influences and such. And I threw them so many weird things, so many like the thing I wanted to avoid. I'll tell you this, and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast here and there. Is like, the band sits down to write the song. They're like, "Okay, here's the riff." You know what I mean?
Yep.
Here's the chorus. Here's the breakdown. It gets really formulaic, and when you've written 10 records, you can't do that anymore.
No.
Because you've already done it so many times. What comes out is just same stuff, but not as good. So it's got to be, here's this Nicki Minaj song. Here's the beat. You know what I mean? Here's this keyboard line. I'm thinking something like this for the bass. You know what I mean? Like, you got to get really out there, really out there. So I'm talking too much. I want to hear from you. Tell me a little bit, just as a project fan. And again, we're talking about project because this is primarily going on our Patreon community. So, and this is basically the P86 Omni centric Patreon. So the content here, we talk about project music, but this will be seen by others outside of that community. So if you're wondering why, I'm tooting my own horn so much here by talking about projects so much, that's the reason. That's the reason. So I just want to hear, like, what was your favorite project record or couple of records? Are you more just like songs and Drawing Black Lines, or were you listening to some of the later ones too?
It's a hard question because, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a meathead. So Drawing Black Lines, when you listen to a record for 20 years, it cements itself in your, I don't even have to listen to Drawing Black Lines to listen to Drawing Black Lines, right? It is cemented in my brain for all time.
Same.
Now I still listen to it sometimes out loud at work to annoy people. But I think, yeah, Drawing Black Lines, that's the easy answer. That's easy for me to be like, yeah, it's absolutely the best thing ever, right? And I don't think a lot of fans would disagree with that. But as far as my history, I heard Drawing Black Lines first. And I remember it was actually my friend Buddy got me into Project 86. And he was like, because I had just started going to this youth group, and my friend Buddy was the only guy that talked to me that listened to heavier music. And so he's showing me all these CDs. He's like, I got every CD that, you know, that you want to hear, you know. And I was like, yeah, cool. You know, I was like, I listened to like heavier, like I listened to like Mudvayne and stuff like that. And he's like, okay. He's like, I don't have anything that's exactly like that. He goes, but listen to this Project 86 record. This band stands out the most because they don't sound like anybody else. You know, this isn't like a, yeah, it was a very, and like I listened to it, I was like, yeah, I've never heard vocals like this before. I've never heard, you know, the energy, I think, is really what pulled that sort of like punk energy of Drawing Black Lines. Like whenever you, like, I think the first song I heard was Set Me Up. And what got me about it is that song does not let up. There's no moment to breathe. There's no any, like, it's just go, 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 go. And so that is whenever I was like, okay, yeah. So like, obviously this band is incredible. I love this record. And then we started doing our internet research thing. And then we're like, oh, there's this whole other record that the band put out before this one. So we tracked, I actually bought self-titled P86 at Best Buy, I think like a year after Drawing Black Lines came out. And I still have that copy somewhere in all of those CDs that are behind me. But but I liked that one too. But not for the same reason. So that was the first time where I was like, okay. I was like, so there's a little bit more to this band, because sometimes when a band puts out something that's like so heavy and so extreme, you kind of start to wonder, is this all they got? Because like I'm a Napalm Death fan, and so that they are a great band, but you don't need more than like 2 or 3 records from Napalm Death, even though I know they have like 30.
Right.
Because you're gonna get comparably the same thing every single time. So I don't necessarily know if I would have continued with Project 86 if I didn't hear the self-titled and hear kind of the darker vibe. Because even though Drawing Black Lines is heavy and incredible and intense, self-titled had kind of this darkness about it, you know. The songs were slower, they were like more broody, the lyrics were weird, you know what I mean? So it was just very there was a lot for me to dig into and dissect. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'm just a straight up fan. And then I know we only waited like 2 years for Truthless Heroes to come out, but to us as teenagers, it was like, oh my God, when is Project going to put, you know, another record out?
We felt the same way. Yeah.
And so, but Truthless Heroes is probably the one that I listen to the most.
Oh, really?
Well, because Buddy drove me to school every morning. I didn't get my driver's license until I was like 18. And so this dude drove me to school literally every day, like loyally. Like I was in a band with him and we kicked him out of the band and he still showed up to pick me up for school the next day. You do not find friends like that.
That's a good friend.
You know, yeah, anywhere else, right? And but we listened to Truthless Heroes like almost every single morning on the way to school. And we loved it. We at the time we weren't elitist metal fans. Like I wasn't a huge douche like I am now, you know, about music. Back then we're just stoked that it's more Project, right? We don't necessarily care that it doesn't sound like Drawing Black Lines. It makes sense. Their first record didn't sound like Drawing Black Lines. So like I really enjoyed the variety. And then we just stayed, I'm getting a little long-winded, but like we just stuck with the band after that. We thought you guys were so cool whenever you broke from Atlantic. We were like, nobody tells this guy what to do. You know what I mean? Like it was one of those like they're absolutely going for the gut. I remember going to project86.com and seeing "We're tired of being slaves," you know, posted up on there. And so,
that was pretty genuine.
Yeah. But I mean, it was crazy. And then we were like, oh, but they're putting out a new album. Like almost immediately after that, we were like, oh man. And so like we ordered the independent copy of
Songs.
Songs to Burn Your Bridges by, right? And we were just we listened to that. We heard Spy Hunter. We were disciples at that point.
That's
We were
cool,
like
dude.
we were all in. It was one of the greatest things. We saw you guys with I think it was Dead Poetic and Haste the Day in St. Louis. It was the first
Mhm.
time that I had ever seen the band. You and I actually talked after the show, although I was probably like 200 pounds lighter and had an afro, but it was
Sweet.
one of those, yeah, it was one of those things where we talked after the show and it was really, really cool. Like we felt really connected. And what's funny is after that show, 2 days later, I was supposed to go to, I had a psychology class in high school that I had to go to, and it was raining outside. And I decided to ditch going to psychology class to go see my girlfriend. And I ended up, and I was listening to Songs to Burn Your Bridges by the new version that had the extra songs. And right in the middle of the song Oblivion, I flipped my car
Oh,
two
you
times.
flipped it?
Flipped it accidentally. I mean,
Oh.
obviously accidentally, yeah, but like but it's so funny
How?
because the CD still keeps playing. I think I must have, I was on like a windy road,
Yeah.
and it was a little bit wet outside, which is more dangerous than it being super wet, right?
Yeah, the first 30
And
minutes is the worst.
a car in front of me slammed on the brakes, and I hadn't been driving for that long, maybe 2 years, and I slammed the brakes on also, and the car skidded sideways. And so the entire time the car's flipping, it's like slow motion, like a really crappy music video, right, where you have like a car that's like flipping in slow motion, and the entire time the song Oblivion is going in the speakers.
Wow.
And it was still playing when I was sitting upside down in the car waiting for the waiting for the fire department to
Whoa.
to get me out. And then
Are you sure you've
um
never told me this story?
so we'll talk about this a little bit later. I actually told I told Steven that story
Okay.
on my old podcast when I interviewed him.
Okay.
And but yeah, so yeah, it's a story I've told a few times
Gotcha.
because it's like honestly one of the best ones.
That's
And it was
crazy.
funny because like my parents were pissed because I wasn't driving my car.
Oh,
I was driving my mom's car
you had
because my mom's
insurance,
car,
hopefully?
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I was driving my mom's car because her car had a CD player,
Mm,
right? So I wanted to listen
that'll
to,
do it.
yeah. And then I remember the car got impounded, and my dad, he comes, he gets the estimate for how much damage. The car's totaled; it's never coming back; it's gone. And he's like, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" And I was like, "Did you happen to get that Project 86 CD out of the
No, you didn't.
out of the CD
You
player?"
didn't
I
say that.
did, I absolutely did. Um,
That's crazy.
and yeah, so like obviously we were huge fans, like almost creepy level, like huge fans. And
That's pretty
so
big fans,
whenever,
dude.
yeah, I mean, we really were like, because to us, Project 86 was that band that belonged, in a certain sense, belonged to us, in the sense that like, you had bands like POD that went huge megastar.
Yeah.
You had bands like,
I vaguely remember that.
yeah, that might be something that you remember happening. But to us, but like, here's the thing though. Whereas you're sitting there being all like, when are we going to get our shot? When
Yeah.
is our time to take off? We're just as good as those other bands. Like I get that. Like, but from the fan perspective, we liked you because you weren't sellouts,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like we're like, yeah, Project 86, they're always going to do, the thing that you don't expect them to do. And like all of that stuff. So like it really was a very positive thing. And so I mean, we stuck with the band for quite a while. I whenever when The Rest Will Follow came out, I was like, this is, and The Rest Will Follow, like I was like, this is just more like we heard Ichabod, we're like, yeah, man, they still got it, like it was crazy.
Mm.
Um, and then I think it was Rival Factions was different. That one was kind of a hard, and like I talked trash on Rival Factions whenever we covered the band on my
Yeah,
old
a lot of the
podcast.
diehards didn't like
Yeah.
that one. I mean, It's hard for me because we were having fun when we made that record. I did have fun. I did enjoy
Oh,
the
you can hear it. Yeah.
process. I was enjoying trying different things, singing and such. There were elements to the sound that for sure you connect with, um, but it wasn't hard, you know.
Sure.
Uh, and then a lot of the fans didn't like it. That some did.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I always end up hating everything I do eventually.
Same.
So there's
Absolutely
been
same.
moments where I was
Yeah.
like, well, was it for those guys and we wouldn't have done that? You know what I mean? But at the same time,
Sure.
dude, I was there. I was just as much a part of it, you
Yeah.
know? And plus, like, it was the moment where I could feel everybody's going their different ways in terms of their influences, in terms of their lives. And I'm just going, what do I need to do to keep everybody on the same page? Even if it means that I'm getting less of my way, and
Sure.
that's kind of where we ended up. Um, there's a lot of good songs on that record. I tell people if it was another band and that was their first release, that band probably would have been pretty big
Yeah, like
because
a
there's some,
featuring members of Project 86 kind of
yeah,
deal. Yeah, like yeah.
there's some viable like singles on that
Put Your Lips
record.
to the TV. I love that song. I especially love it now. With my a lot
I
of those songs grew
hate
on me
my
over the
voice
years.
on that song. I can't even listen to it. Like the
I like
music's
it.
cool. I just think I sound so annoying on that one. I think I sound annoying on Truthless Heroes as well. Um, on certain parts. There's other parts there's parts that I love on every record.
Sure.
But there are cringy songs that I can't listen to where I just hate the sound of my own voice. But that's just the way I am. I hate all my lyrics. I hate my voice. I hate everything because I just want it to be perfect and like
I feel that.
so I'm
Yeah.
always like revising and such. Hate's a strong word. I don't hate it all. I just I'm critical of it. So
Sure.
I look at Drawing Black Lines and I still think that like that was the moment, right? For Project. That was a big moment, if not the moment. And there's not a lot that I'm critical of, but man, there are certain lyrics where I'm just like, really? I said that? And like some sort of fungus, we're growing every day, and people loved it. And I was
That's
just
so
like,
cool. It's you
I'm
say
like
it so
that.
confidently on the
I'm
song
like
though.
that
Like it
lyric sucks. So no one's more critical of me than me, and no one thinks I'm a bigger douche than I am. Like you ask my kids, and they'll say like, "Dad, why do you freak out when you drop stuff?" Because I always drop stuff. Like I'll be in the kitchen, and I'll drop something on the floor. And it's all my might not to say a bad word because sometimes I slip and I'll say a bad word, and they just start
sure.
laughing. Like, dude, why do you freak out so bad? I'm like, I just get mad at myself.
Yeah.
So I'm like really hard on
You put too
myself.
much pressure on yourself.
I
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
definitely. It's the curse of this. I overthink, so always analyzing, always hyper aware, but always like sometimes just totally not self aware at the same time.
Yeah.
Anyways, dude, I appreciate all that. You were talking about rival factions and such, and obviously like it was kind of a new era from like Wait for the Siren forward. Did you live with any of those records?
Yeah,
Were
actually.
they was
So
that a hard thing to list those records?
nah, okay, so it's it's complicated.
Always.
No, so the rival factions was a no for me at the time, although it did grow on me over time because like
Yeah.
eventually I got over the whole like I'm only a metalhead and I will never listen to anything other than metal ever in my entire life. Once I got past that, yeah, I'd go back to rival factions and be like, this is kind of a good, this is kind of a good time. Some of these songs like have a bit of a jam to them. And
Mhm.
I like the vibe. It was a way for me to sort of get away from all of the screaming, but it also was like dipping my toes slowly into it because there is still some screamy stuff going on rival factions.
Mhm.
Um, I think Picket Fence is where I checked out. Somewhere in the middle of that. Um, Somewhere in the middle of that record. I think it's Devastator. like,
Right.
um, and that was the part where I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not totally stoked on this. I like some songs on that record. I like The Butcher. I like The Black Brigade. But yeah, that was the point where I was listening to so much different stuff that it wasn't even a like, oh, I'm done with this band kind of thing. It was just the
Mhm.
natural progression of like, I'm into other stuff now, right? But Wait for the Siren actually pulled me back in. So we, because it was with Goliath, Goliath Fall,
Mhm.
and I actually went and saw you in St. Louis, Missouri. I think it might have been the last time you ever played there. Maybe not.
Mm.
I was, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of tour dates, but I remember we were there, and it was right when that record came out, and you had a new band. Like, it was public knowledge that, like, yeah, we're a new, we're Project 86, but we're a new band now,
Mhm.
and I remember being really super stoked that we got to see the band play. So like me and my co-host from my old podcast, we went out, and I actually remember something from that night where you started playing the song "Sots," and you're all like, this is and or you may have even just said SOTS, and I
Yeah,
yelled,
it's the name SOTS.
yep,
Yeah.
and I yelled from the crowd, "Song of the South,"
Yeah.
and yeah. And then you looked at me and go, "Yes, exactly," and then started playing the song, and it was uh but yeah, no, I was stoked on that show. We were stoked on the record for a long time. And obviously having Bruce Fitzhugh on something,
That was
earned
cool.
us even more. Yeah, I mean, the dude's a beast.
Mm.
And so yeah, it added a lot in. And then this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I don't remember anything about Knives to the Future. And it's not your fault.
Uh,
It's just I just don't remember. It's just like a big blank. I don't know if I just skipped that record or life got in, because this is around the time where I'm starting to get married and starting
sure.
to sort of go out on my own in the world, and so I wasn't paying as close attention. And then but when Sheep Among Wolves came about, I was a backer. I don't know if I was backing the entire campaign or not, but I was definitely, because I remember listening to some of the podcasts that you made, because you were doing a lot of
Mm.
a lot of similar things that you've done on the new Patreon, which is song explanations, song breakdowns. You guys
Mhm.
even re-recorded a couple of older songs, which was
Yeah.
cool to hear. you know and I listened to that record, Sheep Among Wolves. I had it on vinyl. I think it might have been one of the last vinyl records I bought, because or I didn't really buy it, it was just included as part of my thing. But I remember, yeah, I stopped collecting vinyl after that. Not because that record ruined vinyl for me. It just was one of those, like, but I remember after hearing that record, kind of getting a little bit of like I like this. But I do remember thinking maybe I'm just not into Project 86 anymore, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And
A lot of
again, it's
people. A
not
lot of people
because
said that around that time with Knives and Sheep Among Wolves, and I totally get it. I mean, when you're close to the songs, though, you don't know that that's going to happen. It's just
sure,
you're too close to it. You need to live with it and kind of get some space from it, and then come back to it. And then now, I totally hear it. The production, the songwriting. Project and for better or worse, the darker, the heavier, the better. And it just, no matter how much I've tried to experiment over the years, and it's all like, I don't think there's anything that's been done along the way that I would go, that's awful, you
yeah,
know. But I tell people my melodic singing, or the quiet melody stuff, or even the shout singing melody stuff, I can do it all, you know, in terms of that realm, like and pull it off.
sure,
But it doesn't hit you the same way as when it's pissed and when it's dark,
sure,
And I realized that at some point where I'm just like, look, there was this moment, and this is really where it started. We were in the studio after Drawing Black Lines. Atlantic had uh, put us back in the studio. It was really our A&R guys sort of engineered this opportunity for us. There was
hmm,
a film being made at that time, wasn't out yet. They were still, dealing with the music for the film. Ended up being called Rockstar, with Jennifer Aniston and Mark Wahlberg.
it's the Judas Priest movie, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And we got an advance copy of it from Atlantic, and our A&R guy was like, "Do you guys want to take a stab at writing single for this. No guarantees, but we'll give you some budget, we'll put you back in with Garth. Try to write something that's going to resonate, that we can pitch to the film.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, we're gonna put you in the studio now, go write a hit song.
Sure.
And I remember we went in, and it was a really different mentality, and it was really difficult, especially for me, because I didn't really. It's not that I can't sing. I feel like I've proven it over the years, but at that time I was not comfortable trying because it's not what I wanted to do.
Right.
And out of there were 3 songs written. Out of that session, we got Spy Hunter, which was really funny because it's one of our biggest quote hit songs. But the song that we wrote that was for the film really didn't come out that good. It's a song that we never released. And I remember being in the studio and kind of doing something in the middle between shouting and singing and just kind of not nailing it, or it just didn't sound as confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Garth, the producer, just like crushed me. He just said, "You can't sing. Don't ever try."
Oh my goodness.
I was like, or something like
Damn,
that.
Garth. Okay. Wow.
He just destroyed me. He's like, "Don't even try to do that. You don't sound as good." And I don't think he meant it in a way where it's like you'll never be able to sing. I think it was just like, we're trying to make the best song here that we can.
Let's not waste time on this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not going to work. So don't try to do that. Just do your thing. Type of thing. But I took it so personally that, and he never knew it, but like I took it so personally that he said that to me that I internalized it, and I said, I'm going to prove to the world I can do these things too. And so subconsciously, I've been doing that on records along the way to prove it to myself. Every time trying something different on every record vocally, just to prove that I'm a diverse vocalist or whatever. So eventually, I just came to the conclusion, okay, I proved to myself that I can do different things other than just the Schwab thing. But I do this thing best, I think, because it sounds the best for my voice and because my emotion is more connected to it,
Yeah.
Which is why, bring back to Omni, which is why I think, again, this is an example of everybody working on the thing is working towards the same end goal. And so the kick, the snare, the bass guitar, the guitars, the vocal, everything's trying to do the same thing and impact in the same way. And it hits harder when you've got all the pieces kind of focused on that same end goal. And I felt it right away. Obviously it helps when you have all these talented people working on it. And it's beyond the NJ dudes like Bo, Rochelle, amazing. George Lever over in the UK, amazing. Darren, who's in my band, amazing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really great people working on this thing. And again, I was always the least talented. I keep saying this. It might sound like false humility. I really felt this way the whole time. I was like, man, I hope I can live up to the music that we're writing, in terms of what I'm bringing to the table.
Right. No, I definitely get that as a vocalist, or an ex-vocalist, at least myself. I always felt that way. I would go in and lead the band in like usually a really douchey way. You know what I mean? Like telling people what to do.
It's frontman's job.
Yeah, acting like I'm their boss, and that sort of thing. And then we're just not going to talk about the fact that I didn't write a single riff. I didn't play a single drum. I didn't pluck a bass string. I didn't do anything. All I did was get in on the mic and scream like a calf with its throat cut. You know what I mean? That's all I did.
Sure.
But at the same time, everybody puts so much importance on the singer.
Yeah.
From a listener perspective, that's where we get the big head from, is because there is also a lot of pressure there, and you feel like you have to put on this like this big like tough guy mask in order to kind of block yourself from any scrutiny. Because if the band screws up on stage, it's not the band's fault, it's my fault. That is how I always felt. And so yeah, I totally I totally feel that. I couldn't even imagine a producer coming up and just being all like, yeah, you're not good at this, so you need to stop. Like, yeah, I'd be like,
oh, that was hard.
I'd be like, I'd do the big swallow, and
oh yeah,
yeah, I'm gonna be up all night about this later. Yeah. Like, I've definitely been there.
I wasn't one night. It was many nights.
Yeah.
Now the proof is in the pudding. I mean, every producer has a style, right? And some guys are more nurturing, some guys are more like football coaches, some guys, kind of adapt to the situation, you know. Um, that was what I needed to hear at that time, but I didn't want to hear it
Sure.
because it motivated me. So at the end of the day, it was probably the right thing for me to hear, even though he was just trying to get through our session. He didn't, he wasn't thinking past that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of segueing into the second part of this conversation, which I think is going to be really interesting. Long time, and there was a reason why I wanted to hear like kind of a detailed account of your relationship with me and the band and all that stuff because it sets up the next part of the conversation.
Sure.
So fast forward, you and I did an interview together, or I did an interview with you and a co-host years
Yeah.
back. I think it was around Sheep Among Wolves, and I remember, you mentioned to me on an email. I can't remember if it was back then or it was during the second transaction that we had together. And I'm going to pass this over to you in a minute.
Sure.
But it was a show where you would talk to bands about records that they liked or that you both liked.
Yes.
And I don't remember the details, but I think you made a couple suggestions that I shot down,
Yeah.
probably in a lame way. And then we ended up talking about something else. But I think it sort of put it on a bad foot. And I own the fact that over the years I have ruffled so many people's feathers, sometimes as a corollary to the Schwab orbit, if that makes
Sure.
sense. And sometimes just inadvertently. I
Yeah.
have a tendency to be really blunt at times. And whenever I catch myself doing it, or saying something that's lame or rude or whatever, I always try to like make it right, you know. So it's not
Sure.
something I necessarily like want to do or I'm making excuses for. It's just I was thinking about this today. I was like, I've got just like this perfect storm. Uh Only child, uh front man for band. Uh and then like you combine those two things with the time that we live in the world, and like there's just a lot of things that sort of predispose me towards being all about that joke where you hold up the light bulb. How many front man does it take to screw in the light bulb? This joke.
I don't remember it. No.
One, he just holds up the light bulb and the world revolves around him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So that
awesome.
guy. So, anyways, I think that's we kind of got off on a weird foot back then, and I didn't remember that specifically. And then when we came back around to almost talking again, I think that was sort of stored in the memory banks and inflamed some stuff. And then we've got the Drawing Black Lines anniversary show that was very divisive, and a lot of stuff happened around that, and we should just talk about all of
Sure.
it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is the podcast conversation that there are some people that are in my listener base. I don't like saying fan base because I think the idea of anybody being a fan of me is gross, but like I think that like that is false humility. You can call them fans, it's fine. But like um it's one of those things where everybody wanted this conversation that we're about to have
Yeah.
immediately after everything happened. And I remember being like, no, I'm still mad. You know what I mean? Or I'm still upset. Or,
Well, let's
you
talk
know,
about what
yeah,
happened.
let's get to the history of it. Yeah.
Let's
So,
talk about what happened. You tell it.
okay. So, the old podcast was called Discography Discussion. It was the first podcast I ever did. I started it with a buddy of mine in 2017. And all we did was exactly what it says on the tin. We discussed the discography of bands, right?
Mhm.
And it was innocent enough at first until we realized that if we talked trash about bands, that we would get more views or listens than we would get if we didn't. And so, but that Mars Volta episode that we did was
Oh, we
actually
did the Mars
relatively,
Volta. That's
yeah.
right.
So that
That's
was
what I was
relatively,
thinking about the other day because
yep,
I just cut that Mars Volta episode for Deloused on on Pale Riders.
yeah.
And
I
and
almost
I
reached out to you and was like, "Do
yeah.
you just want to do this again? Only not weird." You know what I mean? Like, um, but yeah, so that was really early on. So it was one of those weird situations where we were like, who do we reach out to? Because like we were nobody. We're not part of the scene. We're not, this is the part about podcasting that when you start a podcast, nobody knows who you are. When you've been doing a podcast for 10 years, people don't know who you are. Nobody knows who you
Yeah.
are. You have no real gumption, right? I didn't have any connections with the scene. I didn't know anybody, or anything like that. So it was like, okay, so we'll just reach out to people that we like. And I don't want to interview somebody because I wasn't confident as an interviewer at the time. So I was like, who do we talk to? So like we got some cool people on. We got some of the guys from Zayo on. We had like Jason Wisdom on an episode. And like then it was like the natural choice is, well, why don't we ask Andrew? Because I mean, we're all huge fans. This seems like on paper, this seems like a slam dunk. You know what I mean? Like this will
Yeah.
be great. And so I remember reaching out and saying, yeah, we got this podcast or whatever. And you responded like almost immediately. And you were like, yeah, it sounds cool. Yeah. Like, what do you want to talk about? And we suggested a couple of bands. And then you were like, do we need, does it have to be rock bands? Is it a rock or is it a rock metal podcast? And when you said that, I was very much like, I wasn't mad, but I was kind of like, oh, I was not anticipating that to be the follow-up question. Right.
Mm.
Because it had never been asked before. So a lot of this was my inexperience. And so we eventually ended up agreeing on Mars Volta. And then I was like, well, crap, I've listened to like 2 Mars Volta albums ever in my life. But the whole part of the show, we anticipated that. So we had kind of a waiting period where we could listen to everything. But then like, this is so nitty gritty and stupid, but like, basically you were like, yeah, let's do it next Thursday. And then I thought for some reason the next Thursday meant the next upcoming Thursday. So I never told you this. We got together ready to do the podcast that next upcoming Thursday. And then he never showed up. And so I was
That
like,
was just to
oh,
cross wires.
well, that was, us not being able to read, that really most people, when they say next Thursday, they mean the next
The
Thursday, not
next
this
week
upcoming Thursday.
following.
But then we were like irrationally mad about it, even though it was our fault because we were inexperienced. We weren't used to dealing with guys from bands. We didn't really know how the communication was. I was the best talker out of everyone on the show. So I did all the talking as far as like reaching out to people and that sort of thing. So at first we were like, oh, well, he just didn't show up. Okay, well, whatever, right? And then I went back a few days later and started reading the email, and I was all like, I have a feeling he's expecting to show up this upcoming Thursday and do it. And then I was like, well, crap, I haven't listened to the albums yet. So then I spent like I had like a 24-hour catharsis session of like listening to every single Mars Volta record so that I wouldn't sound like an idiot whenever I came on to the podcast. And I think like a lot of that was my fault going in because like from your perspective, you got an email from a podcast that says they wanted to do it. We decided on a date. We decided on a band. Okay, we're good to go. I'll show up at XYZ time. So you have no idea any of this
All
stuff
this
is
other
going
stuff's
on.
going on.
Right. So we did it. And at the time, this is important. Our podcast was like heavily alcohol influenced. So we were like drinking all the time, like pretty heavily most of the time. Part of the cool shtick was that I could stay really, really, really articulate despite being really, really hosed. Right. Back then it was cool. Now I'm like, but so we showed up, we got it all together. We made it work because I was like, and at the time I was like, this is not his fault. Like this was our bad. Let's just have the episode. Let's do it. And I think we had built it up in our minds to be this like big earth shattering, huge thing because we were massive fans. Right. So we were like, we were very much like, don't screw this up, and so we did it. And then and the conversation overall, when I go back and listen to it, is good. It's solid. There's not really anything weird. The only stuff that we got weird about, and I didn't even get weird about it until I made that video, which I'll get into later. I remember, I think it was like it was longer than you and I have been. It was less time than you and I have been talking now. It was like 40 minutes.
Short. It was
yeah,
short.
and you were like, guys, I gotta go. And we were like, oh, okay. because like in our mind, and again, we didn't tell you this, we're like, we're going to talk about the band's discography, but then we obviously want to talk about Project 86 and stuff like that
Yeah.
after the fact. And then so we were like, oh, okay, well, he just had to leave. Well, whatever. But like, honestly, we didn't really think about it that much after that. We were just
Okay.
like, okay, well, that was an episode that we did.
It wasn't that big of a deal.
It wasn't really, no.
Okay.
And that ties into a point that I'm going to make here in a minute, which is, so time goes on, even though it wasn't a big deal, for whatever reason, it left some weird taste in my mouth.
Sure.
I was very
I
weird
do that
about it.
sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I do the same thing. I've done interviews that are horrible. I've pissed people off that I'm interviewing while interviewing them. Like, just say something that I don't realize is horribly offensive, or something that I shouldn't bring up, or so like that sort of thing happens. But I was so inexperienced at the time, I just remembered it as a bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
Even though if you go back and objectively listen to the episode, it's fine. It's no different than anything else that we did. And so fast forward to the Drawing Black Lines live stream. I'm still at that time a follower of Project. I'm following on social media. I'm checking all this stuff or whatever. And at that point, between the time that we did that Mars Volta episode and I think it was 2021, right? For the
very
Drawing
beginning
Black
of
Lines.
2021.
Yeah, it was on my birthday. I was close to my birthday. And I would, at first, whenever I saw the news, oh, they're doing a Drawing Black Line live stream. Oh, that's cool. Can't wait to check it out. That actually was my initial reaction. And then I started seeing all the people, because I wasn't even aware that there was any Project drama before that,
Right.
And so
Well,
I was a little bit.
It's not necessarily always on the forefront. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's like there's been little periods of stuff here and there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it was always like this forefront ongoing thing that's always on people's minds.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember it wasn't until I started reading the comments, which you should never do. I've been making stuff long enough now to know to like really filter what comments I'm going to look at and which ones I'm not going to.
Yeah. You can fixate on the bad ones for sure. I do.
Yeah. But then I saw a post from an ex-band member who had said some negative things.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, what is this? And at the time, I had been podcasting for 2 additional years since that original. I had learned all the tips and tricks of the types of stuff that you're supposed to do when there's a story breaking, right?
Teach me.
Yeah,
I don't even know.
Yeah. I'm going to need you to sign up for my class after the.
Okay. Got it. I'm in.
Yeah. No, it's just that you kind of pick up on things. And at first it was just a curiosity. So I had like a private Facebook group for my podcast. And I snapshotted the negative comments and I posted them in the group. And I was like, what do you guys think about all this?
Hey,
stuff?
what do you guys think about this?
Yeah. This is juicy. Right.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, I think at some point during all the comments that were it was all happened in like one day. Yeah. There was like all these comments breaking out everywhere.
I didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
I had somebody tell me about it. I was like, uh-oh.
Well, somebody,
this is gonna be bad.
Yeah, somebody, I don't know if it was you or if it was somebody else. It sounds like it wasn't you, was trying to do some type of damage control over it. Maybe you had administrators on the page or something that were trying to like, let's get this negative stuff out of here, And so once comments started getting deleted, that's whenever I was like, oh, well, I still have screenshots of the original stuff. So like, I've still got the story. And before I realize it, I'm at work while all this is happening. I'm not even working. I'm like, just being an idiot on Facebook. And suddenly I'm like, I've got all these screenshots and there's this narrative that goes along all of it. And so like when your brain is used to thinking creatively like that, it created a monster, because I'm not thinking about like, oh wow, yeah, there's some bad blood going on that's bubbled to the surface for some reason. And even and I didn't think something at that time that I think a lot of content creators don't think about. None of it had anything to do with Dan Terry.
Sure.
Literally none of it. But it was like I'm a podcaster, and then it was only then, whenever I had made the active decision to be shitty about it, that's when, oh, that Mars Volta episode I had him on, that sucked, and he said this and
Oh
he did
yeah,
this and he did
yeah.
all, you know what I mean? Because it was a convenient thing to pull out and be like, no, see, I have history, I know this guy's a jerk and this and this and
Well,
this.
I
But
am
it's,
a jerk.
yeah, me too. That's what that's what we should call this, is like two jerks talking, like,
Yeah.
because we're all capable of that. And so I'm like, oh my god, I got a story developing. So I go home, I hook up this like 2013 MacBook Air that I was using with a USB microphone. I'd never made a YouTube video before. I wouldn't
Oh,
have called
really?
myself, yeah, that was literally the first YouTube video I ever made.
Oh man.
um and so I sat down, and if you watch the video, which you can't because I took it down a long time ago, but
Right.
whenever like whenever it first came out, you could tell I was super non-committal about what I was saying through about half
Mm-hmm.
of it. You know, it took me like 15 minutes. And it's such a bad video because it was just 30 minutes of me talking, no edits, no cuts, no music, no anything. Like
Right.
none of the cool stuff that you should put in a YouTube video. And the first 15 minutes of it was me being like, no, I love the band and I've been really into the band and yada yada, because that was my comfort zone. I hadn't crossed that line yet of being like, but then once I was like, all right, I'm going to pull up these screenshots and I'm going to show them on
Right.
screenshots of YouTube comments. And I was all like, something's going on over in Project 86 land and it's bad. And like, I don't even remember specifically what the point was. I know I brought up ticket prices. I
Yeah,
was like,
we'll talk.
oh, the ticket
We'll
prices.
talk
Oh,
about that. And in fact, I'm glad to talk about this stuff because it helps me learn. You know what I mean? Because there
sure,
are people that I've seen even this week old stuff, and it's all kind of revolving around that show.
sure.
That were like super mad at me, and like you read that stuff even a couple years later, and you're like, whoa, and you start
Yeah.
like thinking about, okay, what can I do better here? Like, what
Mhm.
message was I sending? Why are these people so angry? Like, let me sort of deconstruct this whole thing. Okay, these are obviously people that are really passionate about the band. They're really probably attached to like certain records. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Drawing back lines is probably really important to them. And I knew going into this, and this is what I was telling you before we hit record today when we were talking before we hopped on here. I was really on the fence about doing that show because I knew it was probably going to cause some drama, and I knew it was going to be divisive. Um,
Sure.
I there were a lot of pros and a lot of cons to doing it.
Yeah, so I was showing all these screenshots and I was like, "Oh man, there's so much." Like there one of the guys that was like involved in the live stream was like arguing with a former band member on Facebook in a different group, and so I was showing all these screenshots. And I remember just thinking like, "Okay, I'm going to put this out. I can't believe whether this is going to." And so I went in, I published the video to YouTube, I went to bed. And I woke up the next morning and it had 1,000 views. And I was like,
Oh man, people love this
yeah,
stuff, dude.
oh, they do. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
dude, you know what I'd give to release like my Omni part 2 video came out, and it had 1,000 views overnight. I'd be stoked. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, yeah, let's
yeah.
go. But, people love drama. It was a badly produced video. But then the guy that was my co-host on the podcast, I was on 2 podcasts at the time. I was on Discography Discussion, which was the one that you were on, and then I
Hmm.
was on another podcast called Brutally Speaking, which was brew
Oh, right, right,
as
right.
in brewing beer. And I left all my contact information. I was like, yeah, anybody wants to reach me here. And then I guess it was probably like 2 days later, I get a message. My co-host for Brutally Speaking messages me and goes, "Hey, Project 86 is reaching out to you on Instagram."
Hmm.
And I was all like, okay. So then I went, because honestly, I didn't really expect it. There was some part of me that like the things that you tell yourself when you do something that you're not really comfortable with, you're like, well, nobody's going to see it anyway. Right.
Well, I
Or
wouldn't
nobody's going to.
have, but someone directed me to it. I don't remember who it was.
Mhm.
It might have been one of the guys from the video production crew or something. Like I wasn't even aware that the Facebook stuff was happening. You
Yeah.
know, um, and then it was just like, whoa, this is a thing. And dumb on my part because well let me back up and just explain. I was on the no side of doing the show because I knew that there would probably be some weirdness, right? I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think that OG dudes would want to do it with me. I really didn't. I was 100% on that.
Yeah.
And I was also in a weird spot that if I did want to do it and they didn't want to do it, I had to make a decision. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? So it
Yeah.
was either we were going to agree to disagree probably at the end of the day. And I needed to either accept that or not do the show.
Right.
And again, and this is what I was saying before, the pros and cons, right? So pros, I felt like there would be a good amount of people that would be interested in it regardless because most people are just fans of music, right? They don't really
Yeah.
care about band members and drama and all that stuff. They don't really care. I feel like there is an added level of interest surrounding Project 86 for whatever reason. Not necessarily in percentage of the actual fan base, but a certain demographic, the certain scene,
Yeah.
seems to have like a consensus of certain opinions about things. And that's just this, they like the original lineup, and I get it. That makes sense. I'm fully aware of that. But there's a lot of people that support me and, the fact that technically I started the band, and there was a couple years, of me starting the band where none of these guys were in the fold, and there was a lot of the decision making that I was always the leader of the thing, for better or
Right.
worse. I wasn't always a good leader. A lot of times I was a bad leader, but for better or worse, that was the reality, and that's always kind of been the reality and the mentality in my head. And I think, while we disagree on a lot of stuff, I think most of those, the older band members would even say that it's like, well, it's his band,
Yeah.
So that was the thing that sort of put me over the top in doing it. Where it's like, okay, I know that people are going to get mad. I know that certain fans are probably going to get mad. There's probably going to be more people that are into it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think it would be a bad decision to make a decision to not do it if more people would enjoy it, than not, because of people that aren't even part of it anymore, even if they were the guys that were on that record,
Yeah.
and wrote it with me, So it was never to take credit away from those guys. I really tried to, we did that VIP thing. I really tried to, honor their legacy. But at one point, I think it was Randy, said he didn't want his name attached to it anymore. And I always assume that those guys are of one accord with that kind of stuff. So I'm always very like, I'm kind of damned if I do and damned if I don't. Because like if I'm talking about them, then I'm using their name to somehow promote what I'm doing with it
Right.
now, right? But if I don't, I'm not giving them enough credit. And so I there's no right or wrong. I'm always wrong, and that's how I
Right.
always feel. So I always feel like I'd rather err on the side of saying less than saying more. And even now I'm cringing because I don't even want to like talk about them. You know what I mean? 'Cause
No,
I
I
don't want
get
to say
it.
I don't want to say anything bad. I don't want to say anything that like bums anyone out or makes anyone mad or anything like that.
Yeah, and like
So
I
I'm
can
just trying to tell
transition from
you
that.
how I
Yeah.
was thinking about it at the time, right?
Yeah, and I can transition from that a little bit in that like when I started making that video, I knew that. I knew that there was nothing that you were going to be able to say that was going to be good enough. That's
Yeah,
that's part of the deal. That's part of like hit piece journalism, right? Is you're like, there's no way he can respond to this in a way that is going to be pleasing to
yeah,
the person that's talking the trash. And it was one of those weird things where, again, at the time, all I'm thinking about is, oh my God, everybody now knows about Dan Terry and Discography Discussion Podcast. Because
yeah,
because literally for years, that's what the game was.
yeah,
That was the game. Like, promote yourself, promote yourself, promote what you're doing, promote yourself. We tried doing it the right way for a long time and nobody listened,
sure,
and so we were very much like, okay, well, I had a bad experience, or at the time in my mind, some kind of bad experience that I can dredge up from the past. I can then combine it with all of these other bad experiences that all these other people are reporting and talking about.
Right.
And then
And there
I
is a
can,
contingent of people that are like that. And that's what I want to talk to you about next, but I want you to continue.
yeah. So, I mean, it was very much a self-serving move, and I was aware of it. I just didn't care at the time because I was like, well, it's worth it because in my mind at the time, I was like, Project 86 on their way out anyway. And you hadn't even announced, I mean, you hadn't even announced that you were
We've
doing
been
the
on our
final
way out
album,
for 20 years, bro.
right?
20,
And
20
so I
some,
was
20
like,
many.
in my mind, I felt like it was a victimless crime without really thinking of the idea. And my wife actually, she's the person that really kind of set me straight on it. She goes, how would you feel is if in 10 years you have been grinding and grinding and grinding and you've become very successful at the thing that you do, and you wake up and there's some guy that you don't even know just on YouTube being all like, this guy sucks and here's why. You know what I mean? Like, how does that, like, how would that make you feel?
That's why
And that
wives
was,
exist. To
yeah,
set
I
us
mean,
straight.
she was the only one that the entire time I would excitedly talk about. I'd be like, oh, right after this happened, the old band members reached out to me and I've been talking to them on DMs and I've been this and this and this. It just, I just felt really important and special in that really stupid kind of way. So then it was like, well, how do I follow? First, you reached out and you're like, hey man, clearly there's some things we need to talk about, or something along those lines. And then we were going to do a call, but then like I think I responded back really really harshly, and I basically just regurgitated everything I said in the video back
I
at
just
you in
didn't,
that
at,
message.
at that moment, I felt like whatever I said to you wasn't going to stay between us. I felt like
Yeah,
it was going to get shared on another video. That was the reason why I didn't jump in. The other
yeah,
reason, to be honest, was I didn't want to take attention away from the event.
sure,
Like I wanted it just to be about celebrating a record, not
right,
this other stuff. And it would have become about that if I would have jumped on there.
yeah. Interesting inside baseball on that was that I because we had you were like, hey, can I reach out to you, through some other medium? And I was like, yeah, we can talk and whenever. And then like I think that there was enough separation to where you kind of were like, maybe this isn't worth it. I shouldn't have gone in. But at that time, during those couple of hours, I was more of the impression of like, he's gonna call, we're gonna talk for a few minutes, he's gonna explain it away, and then he's gonna come in, swoop in, be like, dude, there's a lot of stuff about this that you don't understand, and it's this and this and this and this. And that absolutely 100% would have stayed between us. But because I I felt, well, so I was aggressive to you first, but when I do something, it's not bad. But when somebody else comes back aggressively, oh, that's bad. Right.
Sure.
So that was kind of the mindset
We're
in
all
it.
that way.
Yeah. And so I was like, so it wasn't actually until I realized I was butthurt that we didn't have the phone call and
Sure.
that we didn't talk. And so then I was like, well, screw it. I am going to share this now. You know what I mean? So then,
Yeah.
what did I do? I did the same thing I did the first time. I took screenshots of everything. I had my co-host come on with me and we read all the DMs and we did all the things. And
Yeah. He was yelling at me.
yeah, well, he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know who you were. He didn't really know, but and what he was saying is he's like, this guy Dan is my friend and this person is attacking my friend, you know. And so he just went into like mama bear mode, and was like, he's only ever said positive things about your band. And I think that's what was so weird about it, really was the whole like, because in that second video, I'm like, yeah, I've been a lifelong fan of this band. And um, but everything had just gotten so aggressive and so out of hand
Hmm.
that like by the end of the video, and like, yeah, that one's gone too. But like at the end of it, I'm just sitting there like, what has transpired over this weekend that, because it takes a toll on you. Even if you're wrong, it feels weird. You start, I think I was halfway through that video before I was like, I really wish that none of this had ever even like, I wish I had never done or said anything
Yeah.
at this point.
Discord sucks. I mean, I don't know. You have to have a really, really, I don't know whether it's thick skin or sort of warped soul to be okay inside of that stuff. I certainly didn't feel great about it afterwards. I just didn't know what else to do because I'm
Sure.
like, and sometimes I'm in situations where I feel this way where it's like I can't do anything that's gonna be the right thing in people's minds here.
Sure.
Because the decision has already been made that I'm a certain way or I'm a certain guy in the situation. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. It's like, okay, so you come full circle. At one point you were kind of, I don't know what to call it. Like I've mentioned it a couple of times in this conversation. There's a contingent of people that are very passionate about the old catalog
Sure.
that are mad at me.
Right.
I was actually, I don't know how I came upon it. I saw some thread that was linked to, I think I was researching something for the book that I'm writing on, or that I'm working on. And I came upon some Reddit conversation dating back to the live stream where this guy was going through all this. Maybe it was a couple different posts where people were genuinely like hate me, you know what I mean, and saying all this stuff.
Yeah.
Boom, 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 he did this, he did this, he did this, he did this, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, like I get it, you know what I mean? But also, half of these things are very easy to sort of put in proper perspective,
Sure.
and probably would diffuse this a little bit. Some of this, there's a good point to it. But as someone who's kind of been there, what is it? I'm here with you. Like, what is the thing? Is it just keeping the band rolling? Is it feeling like because I know the thing is always like, well, I've always kind of thought he was arrogant and I've always kind of thought he was full of himself. And then he did this and I just couldn't listen anymore. You know what I mean? Like I've read those things out
Yeah.
there, and I've gotten stuff on Twitter. And this kind of started when I started podcasting, to be honest. Like I remember when I started Pioneers, I started trying to kind of tell my story a little bit about being an artist and talking about like songwriting and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not a songwriter in the sense of picking up a guitar, but I can sit down and collaborate and come up with ideas. Did this on Omni, I've done this on other things that Project's done. There's some songs where I've heavily participated in, riffs and beats and such. I'm capable of
Yeah.
collaboration. And so, even Corey, I'm trying not to sound defensive here, but like I was coming at it from a defensive posture because I think at the time I had heard one of the old guys go on a podcast and say, oh, he doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? He's not capable. He doesn't do that,
You're right.
And it's almost like a challenge, where I'm like, well, no, I can do that. It's just we didn't do that together because it was like a thing in our band that we would fight over or whatever. Quiet Cold War,
Sure.
But then I remember, while we were working on the Omni stuff, even Corey said to me, he was like, dude, you're a songwriter. He's like, you might not play guitar, but you're a songwriter. And I was like, thank you for saying that. Like, it's not that I want all this credit and I want to take it away from other people. It's like, I just feel like I want a chance to prove that that's something I could do. You know what I mean? Not
Sure.
that I'm better at it than someone else that I've worked with or anything like that. But it's just like when somebody tells you, it's just like the Garth thing. You can't sing. Well, no, I can. Maybe you haven't heard me do it, but I can. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I'm not doing it right this second, but I can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a personal challenge, and it maybe isn't even anything to do with that other person. It's more like, can I do that? Maybe I can't do that. Maybe I can't. Maybe I need to prove to myself that I can do that.
Right.
So it's more like coming from that perspective. So I remember like doing podcasts where I'm talking about being like a songwriter and stuff, and I think people got mad at that, he's trying to take all the credit for himself, for records. It's like, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. And it probably came off that way, but that's not my heart. That's not what I want. So getting it back to you, like,
So
I want to
what
try
is
to
it?
understand. Yeah, what is it? What are the things that people, get so mad about that I'm not maybe seeing or I need to improve on or whatever or think about?
So I investigated. There was a period of time where you couldn't go and check your mail without somebody telling me about it. right? Because everybody wanted me to go do the thing again, like we were
Right.
talking about before. Everybody, once you get known for being the guy that does the thing, everybody only wants you to
Like,
do the
yeah,
thing.
you were kind of the
Yeah.
expert
Yeah. Yeah. For
on
a
the
long
Schwab
time.
hate.
They were
I
like,
love it.
they were like, did he, yeah, I could write a book about it. Like, I'm not going to, but it's
Love
one of
it.
those, like, it's one of those weird things where there were a lot of perspectives thrown out.
Yeah,
So my original perspective, as we have established, I didn't really have a problem with you before that.
sure.
Like not a real one, other than like, oh, we had a podcast and I don't think it was like necessarily stellar. That's not like earth shattering. Like, you didn't kill my dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I
Or
wasn't even aware of it.
right,
I
yeah.
guarantee
And
you, because if you would have
so
said, "Dude, let's do an hour and a half," I would have been like, "Cool, let's do it."
yeah, but I think that the problem with that is that at the time I wouldn't have known that. There is a power dynamic there that I don't think people realize, because I'm nobody emailing somebody who is somebody, right? It like, in its most brass tacks terms, I'm talking to somebody of notoriety when I'm not somebody of notoriety. So whenever they say, yeah, does a half hour work? I'm more inclined to be like, yeah, half hour's great. Whatever we
Mhm.
can get. You know what I mean? Like, it's that fanboyism, right?
Sure.
And what we've learned from this experience is that fanboyism goes both ways. Sometimes it's really positive to have fanboys. It's nice to have an echo chamber every now and again,
But it
right?
can get toxic.
But it can get toxic. And so there's a couple of things at play with the whole Project 86 thing, whatever we want to call it. Some of it is, like you said, I think there's perceived arrogance. Like I said, I'm not talking about this like it's something that I'm still mad about, because I'm not. But
It's
like
real arrogance,
when we're
bro.
well, yeah, when we're in so like when we're doing that podcast and me and the other two guys sitting there are talking about our love for this rock band, and the guy we're talking to goes, well, rock's dead, nobody cares about rock. We are all like, okay, well, what are you doing on our podcast, dude? You know what I mean? So it was one of those, like,
Right.
we took it the wrong way, and you didn't mean that
Did I
to
say
be
that?
insulting. You meant what you said. But I think you were talking from your own experience. Like, at that time you were going through a whole thing of, I'm trying to sell rock records to people,
Who
and
don't
they're
want
just
rock
not,
records?
who don't want rock records. They want metal records,
They
or they
want metal
want me to,
records.
yeah. And so I'm trying to sell all this stuff to people, and nobody's buying it. So like, I understand now in 2024 why you said that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But back then it was just like, well, he seemed kind of arrogant, like he didn't really want to be there, and didn't really want to do the podcast. He signed off really fast, right? And so you have stuff like that, and then you take into account how long the band has been around,
Right.
right? And so anybody that felt like you were short with them at a show
Hmm.
over
Which
the
I've done
years,
plenty of times.
countless shows, right? And it's not that you were a jerk every time, but just the few times. If you played
Right.
1,000 shows and you were a jerk 15 times, that's 15 guys on that have Facebook accounts
Right.
that every single time they see you post anything, they comment, "Oh, I saw Project 86 back in 1999, and Andrew was walking to the bathroom and he didn't want to talk to me."
Hmm.
You know, and so then you multiply that by 15 times, and then you're like, okay, great. There's also the fact that, like, this is like my big controversial statement. A lot of the people that grew up in the Christian tooth and nail solid state culture, like I did,
Hmm.
a lot of us don't feel the same way about faith as we did whenever we were younger.
Sure.
And so when our views changed, some of us became hyper liberal. I'm in a weird spot where I'm like too liberal for conservative people, but too conservative for liberal people, right?
Right.
So, but I think as those perspectives change, I think sometimes the band's style changing, but not the faith changing, gets like a little bit muddled up in
Okay.
people's memories. People that reject religion, they don't always remember things that they used to enjoy fondly.
Hmm.
And then something unfortunate happens where you end up saying something to somebody, or you're on a podcast, or you present a conservative viewpoint, and then all of a sudden, like, without any real warning. It's like, oh, this guy's my enemy now because he believes opposite of what I believe. Right?
Yeah, I've read a couple things like that recently. There was a song on our previous record, Sheep Among Wolves, that I made a little bit of a tactical error on because it wouldn't have been an issue had I not talked at all about it, right?
Oh, I know which song that. Yeah.
Yeah, the last song on the record, and I remember, and you could corroborate this with Darren, who was there because we were talking about it. It's like, okay, here's the conversation. I want to write a song about the idea that you feel uncomfortable inside your own skin, and you want to do something to change the external reality of who you are. And I want to write that from an empathetic perspective. And then I want to also examine whether or not that works. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
can you change an external reality and somehow transform the internal reality? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like, shallow example, can I go work out and get a lot of big muscles and feel better about myself? Man, maybe a little, you know,
Sure.
not that much probably in the end, you know.
Right.
Take that to a further extreme. Because like when I grew up, like when I was in junior high, I had a serious self-loathing streak. Like I was really, really low on myself.
Right.
You know, I was tall, I was lanky, you know what I mean? I got made fun of for it, was thin, you know, play sports, people make fun of, you know, attributes on your body, you know, and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And just really intense.
Yeah.
You know, as you get older, you get more comfortable with who you are. You know, you get old enough and you just don't care anymore, you know, what people
Right.
think. But I was trying to write that song for the perspective of, hey, I get it. Like, because I used to feel really strongly about this. I would have given anything to like look a certain way and
Right.
get the chicks or whatever, you know, when I was younger. So I remember that. And I also remember doing everything that I could to change it, and nothing ever worked, you know.
Right.
And so the presentation there, you know, or the idea there is trying to change something externally usually doesn't change the internal, you know.
Right.
And I tried to, you know, think about it sensitively and try to do it in such a way that it didn't just come off, you know, preachy or, you know, I always try to think that way. If I have an opinion
Sure.
on something that would lean one way or the other, can I present this creatively so it, you know, maybe, you know, scratches an itch or forces a person to think, but doesn't like spell it out for them or hits them over the head with my opinion.
Right.
That's always the goal, you know, because then it haunts the person and they think about it and they ask the question. And maybe it produces sort of, you know, response.
Sure.
Any artist, like if they're doing their job, that's what you want. That's the end goal. So that's what I'm thinking in doing this. Well, putting together like the press or whatever on it, you know, and even as we're sitting in there writing the song, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about, you know, a woman who would get plastic surgery. You know what I mean? I'm thinking
Right.
about breast augmentation. I'm thinking about transgender. You know, I'm thinking about all these different things. Um, and as we're, you know, writing the song, finishing it, I don't see anything in the lyrics that's gonna push any buttons really with people.
Right.
But when we get into like marketing the record, the word transgender or transgenderism is in like something that we
Bold.
put up.
Yeah. Like,
Or
yeah.
like this is something that the album deals with. You know what I mean? And people just tripped on that.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm like, wow, you know, like you really think I'm this like horrible, bigoted person for just even putting that word out there. I'm really
Yeah.
not attacking people on this or even trying to convey an idea of a perspective other than I don't know in my experience, like I've felt that way. I don't know that changing an external reality is going to change an internal reality. And that's where I'm going to kind of leave this. But I felt like a ghost. I felt like I want people to see me. And I have felt this desire to almost like do anything to get people to validate me, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm in a freaking rock band standing on the stage. And I know
Right.
that feeling of needing like validation, you know? So that's kind of what it's exploring. And it's not really providing an answer on it, but just the fact that I said that. So I read a couple different people, you know, commenting on that, just like, oh, transphobe and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my
Sure.
gosh, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I think there's some of that too. I think that, but like ultimately, the conclusion that I came to after interviewing past band members, after talking to everybody that ever had a bone to pick with you. I'm sure I've met and talked to all of them. You know, I'm
Really?
serious. I'm serious. Like, you know, it was crazy. And you know, you talk about validation.
Is there a lot of them?
That's what I got. No, I'll give you their addresses later. Don't worry about it. But no, like I signed them up. I signed them up for a physical newsletter so I could get all of their addresses. But
Cool.
no, I think that what it really boils down to is it's a combination of things that some of it you have control over,
Mhm.
some of it you don't. You know, there are people that hate me because I said XYZ about said band when I
Mhm.
was drunk 5 years ago,
Right.
right? Like I'm just that person, right? And there's not a whole lot you can do about it if it already happened in the past. There isn't. Like you're just like, yeah, that happened. You can either choose to forgive me and accept me for it or not.
Mm.
Ultimately it's up to the person that's upset.
Yeah.
You know, to really decide what, you know, how things are going to go. So, yeah, I looked into it and basically I got so there was a time where I was Andrew Schwabbed out because I was so tired of hearing every little thing. And even then, like at first it started off with like, yeah, we're going to burn this guy to the ground because he did something. I have to look up in this thing that remember what it
Well,
was,
that's
but
I'm
he
still
did
not hearing what
something.
I
Yeah.
did. I'm trying to understand
Right.
what I did.
Yeah.
You were the
And
president of the Schwab
there
Hate
isn't.
Club.
No, I resigned from that. I resigned from it specifically because there wasn't a smoking gun.
Right.
You know, I had a lot of people reach out and be like, "Yeah, you know, I was on tour with him and he wasn't cool," or I was, and it's like, okay, fine, but like, it's not a crime to be uncool. I think originally what I was looking for when I was interviewing the old band members, I was like, let's find something about money. I need to get somebody to tell me that he took a whole bunch of money or that he did
Mm.
something, you know, because even I realized in my limited journalistic experience that like I don't have anything
Sure.
right now. I need something concrete. I need receipts that say, you know, he stole money or, you know, even I mean in 2021, I just needed you on video saying something offensive. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Or something that would upset, you know, a huge amount of people really, really, really fast. And I just lost my heart for it in the middle of it because I was like, there is nothing here other than the fact that you've got a guy that's a little bit difficult to work with.
Yeah. Admittedly so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better at that over the years. Gosh, I've had this thought so many times. If I could be working with some of the people that I was pretty hard on back in the day, you know, and worked with them now would be a different because I'm in a much different place. I just have a much different perspective. You get older, you know, chill out
Yeah.
and stuff. Like I still fight for the ideas that I think are the right ideas. You know, you can
Yeah. I
ask
mean,
any of the
see
guys.
Omni. Yeah. Like, yeah.
You know, ask any of the guys that I worked with on this last record. I mean, but we're still all friends. Most of us. I mean, you know, there's one dude that we didn't see eye to eye at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And there's
Yeah.
no hate there. It's just we just didn't see eye to eye on certain things, you know. But all the guys that I was in the trenches with, you know, sort of we circled back and, you know, we're all great. You know, we work
Yeah.
together again. Guys in my band have been playing with me for over a decade. We're great. You know what I mean? They would probably say things that are a little bit different than, you know, the guys that I worked with in the past. It's not like I live to like torture people or anything like that. I just get really hard headed about stuff when I think, you know, I'm right, and I'm not always right. You know. Anyways,
But
there
yeah,
was
I
one.
think that's, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go. Go.
I think it was just one of those like, you know, always hard to work with, or sometimes he doesn't, you know, react well to, you know, to criticism, you know, like
I
all
get
of that sort of
defensive.
stuff. And so it is, I think, a combination of that, knowing someone's hard to deal with, and also like having all of these people that have shared experiences. I can't think of a situation where somebody was like, yeah, he just straight up did this to me and I can't believe he did that. You know what I mean? Like there was
Right.
never anything really like that. And I tried to create that with my video. I was like,
Sure.
yeah, he was a douche on my podcast. Again, not a crime. You know what I mean? And so, and I was entitled anyway because I was like, well, I'm a Project 86 fan. I've been a lifelong Project
Yeah.
86 fan. I should be able to criticize and yada yada yada. And the reality is that like I just knew that I was going to get a lot of attention for doing what I was doing, which is what I was, when you go into content creation, it is an absolute battle zone of look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me,
Yeah.
look at me.
Of course.
And I still believe if I hadn't made that video, somebody else would have. There would have been you'd just be talking to another podcaster. Well, hopefully, uh,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, I lost my heart for it when I realized that there just wasn't anything there. And if you're the kind of person that like disagrees with your worldview,
Mm.
if you're somebody that just hates Christianity or
Mhm.
doesn't like a certain type of worldview, if that's an opinion that you have, then if you just decide, okay, well, him and I can never get along, he's a bad guy, whatever, there isn't anything that anybody can really do about that. You're not going to stop believing the things that you believe just
Right.
to appease a person that makes their fandom of you contingent on you doing and thinking what they want you to think. And I think
Yeah.
we have more people like that now
Mhm.
because all of our experiences are so customizable.
Yeah, for sure.
And they
I
didn't
mean,
used to be.
that's Omni.
That's Omni.
Yeah.
That's why it resonated with me, because I was like, no, I feel that like 1,000%. And so
Mhm.
like I lost a heart for it. After a while, like I started, like when people would message me and be like, you didn't believe this thing that Schwab did. I was like, I do not care. I'm just like, or I would respond
Oh,
with like, I have to have a picture of him robbing a bank
yeah.
or doing something that is just so morally deplorable that there is no,
Yeah.
there's no defense of it. Right.
Now, you sent me a message a while back on Patreon, and this was really cool for me to hear because I do a lot of self reflection on this stuff. I read one of these comments on Reddit, and they're like, "Well, he blamed everybody else for all this stuff on his podcast." Now, to be fair, that person probably hasn't listened to all the podcasts, because what I do is I go back and I listen to them, and then on the next one, I'll comment on it, or two
Right.
episodes, And so I was just, all this is inspired by the fact that I'm working on this book, right? And I'm
Yeah.
trying to tell the story the right way and in a fair way, and also have it be entertaining. But I also want to make sure I'm not throwing anybody ever under the bus while still trying to tell the truth from my perspective,
Yeah.
And I can be a victim as much as anybody else. So, one of the comments I wrote was, well, he blamed, you know, so and so for rival factions. I was like, yeah, it probably sounded like that. But I don't, I blame myself for everything. Let me just go on record and saying that. I'm the one who's responsible for everything. If I've ever said on a podcast, like, well, yeah, POD did this, or Blindside did this, or Atlantic did this, or Tooth and Nail did this, you know what I mean? I'm relaying how it felt in the moment. But at the end of the day, I was the one responsible. Who was responsible for Truthless Heroes? Me. I was, the most responsible. Rival factions. Me. I was one who was responsible for that. Because it's my band and I'm leading it. Even if I'm leading it poorly. So there's a difference between me saying this is how I felt 20 years ago and
Mhm.
me now in 2024 looking back on it going, whose fault was that? Um, I know that there's been times where I've said, well, I wouldn't have done this if those guys didn't do that, or these people, or this producer, or whatever. I'm just sussing it out, trying to figure it all out. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like where I'm landing is, look, it's my bad. You know what I mean? All this has been, all the time it was me, right? Quote
Right.
to quote I hate when
Me
people
against
do that.
me. Yeah.
Quote
Yeah.
themselves, but
I almost said earlier, you and I were at something of a stalemate at the time, but I
oh,
I gotta.
bam.
I was like, I gotta save it. I gotta save it because then if I do that, I have to put a sound effect on it. Yeah.
So I never said the thing I was going to say. So you came to me and you said, look, I've been talking to all these people and, ex-bandmates and such. And then I came on here on the Patreon and I
Mm-hmm.
started listening to the podcast and I realized, you guys are both telling honest stories from just different perspectives, from
Yeah.
just your different experiences. You have very different perspectives on things, but you both are telling, the truth or whatever. And that's just what it came down to, with all
Yeah.
this stuff, and I think that speaks for the fans that are no longer fans or don't support me, but support the, old incarnation of Project 86.
Yeah.
There's a difference of opinion there about the way things shouldn't be. And that's okay. We don't have to be jerks to each other about it. We can agree to disagree,
Sure.
and that's the thing for me is I don't ever want to leave like a bad taste in someone's mouth. You know what I mean? I think we can disagree. You know what I mean? But when I read that there's people on the internet that are like, F that guy. I hate him. He's awful. I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow, what did I do to you, man? This is just music, you know?
Well, there's something else I could tell you about being in the world of the internet. Haters are a really good sign of success.
Well, okay. Yeah.
I mean, they are. In the sense that people are still talking about you. Is it better for people to talk about you badly or them not to talk about you
Or
at
to
all?
forget about you. Yeah. That's
Right.
true.
So
That's true.
that's one of those, like, the haterism in a certain degree keeps the mythology alive, so to
Live.
speak. It makes it real.
The
And
legend.
funny story about that funny story about that message. I sent that message and then you blocked me like immediately after. But I think it was more because it was one of those like, oh, is this guy like feeding my Patreon episodes to people or something like that? I think there was like some kind of weird disconnect because my membership was revoked immediately after I sent that message. But I think it was because there was some of the wording in it where I was all like, I think I was still in kind of a transitionary phase from like the way I was then to the way I am now, where
Oh,
I was
yeah,
like,
that
I
might have been.
understand. Yeah, I was like, I understand where you're coming from now. But then that was the only willingness I was given to like, but I think I was like something along the lines of like, I get where you're coming from now, but I'm still right. Or something like something dumb like that. And looking back on it, realizing like how weird it is to sign up for somebody's page. This is where I talk about fanboyism going in a toxic way, where you sign up for somebody's Patreon under a different name than is what your own, so that you can listen to what's going on, and then reaching out to that person and being like, "Ha ha! I've been here the whole time." Super weird.
Well, we have had a lot of that on the Patreon where people
Oh,
would come
really?
on and and that's probably why I was so protective at that moment.
Sure.
But I was
Well, I
getting
mean,
a
it's
lot of reports from people coming on and trolling, and they would listen to a couple things, you know what I mean? And then they'd get some stuff that they could be first to go over to the Tooth and Nail group on Facebook with,
sure.
or whatever group it is, and say, he said this. He
Right.
blamed these guys for this. He threw these guys under the bus. And like, I went back and I listened to the Truthless Heroes episode the other day. I was like, I can see where people would think that on here, because I was just kind of talking about all the different factors involved that were sort of against us. And I wasn't taking enough responsibility for the fact that it was, at the end of the day, me that was against us the
Sure.
most because of some of the decisions that I was making. So I can see why somebody would think that. I could see why somebody would say that I was arrogant or am arrogant. I could totally get that. I don't want to come off that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do. I try to be as aware of it as I can. But look, it's a double-edged sword, dude, because I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. You don't want like normal banker, chill, every guy dude up on that stage who has no stage presence. You're not going to pay attention to that band. The band that
You're
you're going to
not.
pay
No.
attention to is the dude you want Tim Lambesis. You know what I mean? That guy's a superhero up there. You know, does he have a story? Sure does, you know.
Yeah.
But like that's part of the appeal. You know what I mean? So you gotta, you know, it comes with both. So,
Sure.
if I wasn't, you know, a certain way, and again, I see it, you know, only child, frontman for the band, you know, age of narcissism, I got the gift, right?
Sure.
You know, if it wasn't, you know, then I wouldn't be writing Me Against Me, and I wouldn't be up there going, you know, this next song's dedicated to someone very special, you know,
Right.
me, you know,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing all that stuff. And it's like I'm not defending it. You know what I mean? There's no excuse for being an arrogant jerk, and I've certainly been that at various points. But hopefully, the takeaway, you know, from this conversation, anybody um, that if anybody would listen to it, you know, is that one, I think it's really cool that we're able to kind of complete the circle here. No pun
Yeah.
intended. And then
Nice.
two, say like I genuinely have a desire for people to not hate, but I realize they're going to, you know.
Sure.
And I certainly would love to take responsibility for things that were my responsibility along the way, which is a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I just want at the end of the day to say thank you to everybody who supported this band, whether you supported 10 records ago, 9 records ago, 8 records ago, still thank you. You know what I mean? I would love to still have you come along for the ride uh, with P86 Omni, this new thing, you know, that I think that there's a lot of rich stuff in there to attach onto, and that's going to be really fun for me to continue to explore. I'm really excited about the music. Um, and at the end of the day, like that's the thing that gets me pissed at myself is I need to shut up because I'm distracting people from the music. The music's supposed to be the most important thing, not my worldview, not my whatever politics, not my what you know. And that's always the goal when you're, at least for me, when I write lyrics, it's supposed to be me getting out of the way and letting the music speak. You know.
Yeah.
So hopefully, like this conversation can contribute to that.
Yeah, I think it's been really cool. Like obviously, yeah, to complete again, this is the interview, right? This is the podcast that everybody wanted to hear because people are weird, right? There's a period of time where everybody wanted you and I to hate each other because that was
Well, that's more
entertaining.
fun. That's more fun.
Yeah, and then but then eventually everybody's like, "So you guys ever going to reconcile?" And I was like, "Well, I said horrible things about this person in public." You know, and so I have a bucket list of people that I have always wanted to interview like actual podcast interview, and I remember scratching your name off the list after that happened because I was like, well, that's
Yeah.
never gonna happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're never gonna get there again. You know, like like I have poo-pooed that beyond, you know, ever. That's why even after, you know, we had talked and had kind of cleared the air on things, um I was like, I'm just going to go back to just being a guy that likes the band. And I do have a podcast, so if a record comes out, I'll talk about it, you know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But I never, you know, I was like, I'm never going to ask anything else from you, you know what I mean, in the sense that
Yeah.
like I'm not going to be, because I don't ever want to, number one, I don't want to fall into that, like, oh man, this is going to get so many views if I just
Yeah.
do, you know. And that was the hard thing. I'm going to talk about me for a minute here. But no,
Good.
the that was the hardest thing for me is like I came from a podcast that was very um very harsh and very
Hmm.
critical, and I was doing it with people that didn't really have my best interest in mind, you know. I in 2021, the same year I made the video, at the end of the year, I made the decision to stop drinking, and that put a big bummer on the show. I
Good for
was
you
on two
though.
shows. I was on a show that was like about beer, like about drinking beer and talking to bands, you know, and then I was on discography discussion, which was just, you know, drink beer, talk trash about some bands that you probably actually loved when you grew up, when you were growing up,
Right.
you
Right.
know, but you're going to talk bad about them because that's edgy and everybody loves a hot take and, you know, all this stuff. And people just, a drunk, belligerent idiot is more entertaining than a sane person half the time, like the can't look away factor. And so, like, when my co-hosts started getting like irritated with me, he's like, yeah, you know, you're being too nice to bands on episodes since you quit drinking. You're starting to have a more and I was like, oh my, yeah, man, screw me for having a balanced take on something,
Yeah.
or just basically just trying to be a person above
Yeah.
being a host or above being a performer or whatever you want to call it. Podcasts are a different animal than being in a band. You know what I
Right.
mean? When you're in a band, yeah, you're right. You do have to do stuff like that on stage, entertaining things. This song's about somebody really special to me. But as a podcaster, your number one selling point is your relatability.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people listen to you talk all day at work. It's creepy to think about. If you've released a bunch of podcasts, the thought that people have listened to just your voice alone for hundreds of hours, while they get
Mm-hmm.
through their day. And so whenever I quit drinking and I started kind of sobering up, I was like, oh man, I did this whole thing with Project 86 that I probably shouldn't have done. And I did it just to get views. And like, where are those views now? Because those viewers didn't come back because I didn't keep making that content.
Yeah.
Right. So like, so you ruined a potentially good relationship with a musician because you wanted views that you got once, and that was that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, and then the personal side, as I sobered up and I started thinking about things more objectively, I was just like, wow. So like I just absolutely attacked a dude for basically no real reason. You can sum it up and say, oh, well, I've made mistakes along the way. And, like, yeah, sure, that's true. That's true for all of us. We've all done things that are stupid. But it didn't necessarily give me free reign to just go in and just be like, oh, I'm just going to tear this guy apart because that's the type of content that I think people want me to make. And if that is the kind of content people want me to make, then I don't want to make that content. I don't want to be in there. So I had to just leave.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was the right decision for your life, for your soul, for
yeah.
everything. It seems like that's been good for you. I mean, we never really did talk about the show that caused so much problems in terms of the details. I mean, I remember reading somewhere that people were mad because the $250 deal, and I think we talked about this off camera, but we didn't talk about it during the podcast.
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to mention this because I know people are like wondering about this. Oh, why did you do that show? Why'd you charge $250 and all stuff? Well, and hopefully this is a reasonable enough explanation. Maybe it's not. Maybe it'll never be satisfactory for some people. But I did say I was on the fence about doing the show, right? And so
Yeah.
we needed to cover costs to be able to do it at a certain level that I felt like was warranted.
Sure.
From the lore surrounding that record. And
Sure.
a lot of production costs. If you watch the thing, it was pretty well produced. I think it came out pretty good. The people that pay for the stuff nowadays with my endeavors are the people that fund the VIP stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's the higher level VIP spends that cover the events and cover the records and cover the, you know what I'm saying? So with that one, because we're in like pandemic times, it wasn't like we weren't really allowed to have the public at that show. The venue didn't want that. We had to kind of like finagle to get 50 people in there. And so that wasn't selling ticket to a show. That was selling you're kind of coming in on our guest list and being someone who's not supposed to be there situation. And we know this costs a lot of money. We're going to feed you while we're there and kind of let you be the fly on the wall for the whole production. We know this is a lot of money. We know it's a lot of money, but to those however many 30, 50, whatever people that did that, you're the ones paying to make this happen. If those people don't pay that money, we're not able to do it or do it in that way. And that's kind of the way that my whole structure works now. It's not like we have hundreds of thousands of people buying stuff. It's the smaller number of diehards that spend quite a bit on stuff that really make a difference in order for us to, Omni doesn't happen without those inner circle of supporters.
Right.
But because they're there, we're able to maintain a level of quality control, which, your production is directly connected to your spend. It costs money to get stuff that looks and sounds good. And that's just the bottom line. So it's not like I'm not aware that there's a contingent of a lot of like old school and diehard fans that are like, what the heck? I'm not going to spend $500 on a dinner with the band. That's rock star stuff. You know what I
I used to
mean?
be like, what's he cooking? What's he making? This had
Right.
better be the most life-changing meal I've
It's not
ever
for
had in my
you
life.
though.
Yeah.
It's for
Right.
that one dude who's, got the disposable income who wants to support the band, and those people are out there. And what I've learned is, yeah, it's going to be ridiculous to 99% of the people, but it's not for them. It's for
Right.
that one guy who really wants to support what we're doing. And you know what? We need it because
Yeah.
it's a hard thing, man, to make a living doing this. It really is. It really, 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 really is difficult. And that's the one thing that's been the biggest challenge in all this time is how do you justify putting the amount of time and energy into making this stuff on the level that I want to do it on,
Yeah.
uh, and still be able to like justify the time that you're putting into it by at least being able to like pay your bills. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Almost impossible. And so without the Patreon supporters, without those inner circle of like the diehards, you know what I mean? Like, there's no way. You know, it's not covered by streams and like selling a few t-shirts here and there, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Or the guy who just buys a CD or buys the one record or whatever. It's the diehards that drive it all, and that's kind of the model for a lot of independent bands. If you have diehards, a couple hundred, 500, 1,000, whatever it is, you can have a career. You know what I mean? It's not going to
Right.
be gigantic, but you can do it,
Yeah.
And so I cater experiences to those people, but it's, just for those people.
Right.
And if you can't do that, then don't. You know what I mean? But don't get mad at me for trying to do a higher level production because I've got 10 guys or 20 guys or 50 guys that have expressed to me, we want to support you more. You know what I mean?
Right.
You just got
Yeah.
to give us an excuse. So, hey, here's a dinner. You get an executive producer credit. You know what I mean? Or you
Sure.
get to come hang out all day. Or you get to hop up on stage and do a guest vocal or play drums on a song or
Right.
whatever. And like people want that stuff because they want to support and they want to be there and want to be a part of it. So I don't think
Yeah.
that's
And
wrong, but I know
it's
how that
not.
comes off to like certain fans.
Yeah, and keep in mind the people that have decided that they're mad at you and that they hate you. There's nothing that you're ever going to be able to do right,
Mhm.
right? Because like
I
where
know
does the
that.
price outrage argument really break down? It breaks down in that if I'm mad that your band number one exists and has the audacity to charge people ticket prices that people have historically paid in the past, if you threw it out there and nobody supported it, then the problem would solve itself.
Sure.
I don't have to say anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In order to get, I guess the result that I want if I just for whatever reason hate the fact that your band exists, right?
Or
Like
that I'm an old dude still making music, right?
right.
Well, I'm aware that I'm an old dude still making music. I mean, you think that I don't know that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like the deal has always been from album one. Enough people want to support me doing this and make it at least viable for the time. Why wouldn't I keep making records? You know what I mean? As long
Yeah.
as I'm passionate about it, as long as I have something to say,
Sure.
who wouldn't do that? You know what I mean? Like the Meshuggah dudes are up there on stage, not just because they love metal, but because there's a lot of people supporting them doing that
Right.
stuff as well. You know, they wouldn't be doing it if there was one person in the crowd. You know,
Yeah, for
so,
sure. Yeah. Like I
yeah,
mean it's just one of those things that like and I'm glad you explained it like that. I think it's just one of those things that if you're as a person who has been that guy,
yeah,
um it's really one of those like there's a million different things that you if you just decide for whatever reason, and I to answer your question from earlier better, everybody has their own personal reason why they don't like you or like the band, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And
totally.
of course you try to find like-minded people, right? And the thing is that ultimately, and that was the weirdness in my situation, is that I didn't necessarily like dislike the band, but I knew that if I could be calculatedly mean about everything,
Mm,
that it would give me some kind of boost, in
Yeah.
popularity. But everybody has their own personal reason. So like, even if you explain, well, this is why we have supporters, they don't care. They'll just move on to the next thing. You know.
Sure.
Oh, did you guys hear he's planning on doing Omni Part 3? Can you? How dare him?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
and I
that
know
sort
I'm
of
gonna
like,
get flack for that one too,
yeah,
because it's like, I thought you were going away, dude. I was like, well, a lot
yeah,
of people like this stuff, and I had a lot of fun. My voice isn't messed up anymore, and this is kind of a brand new thing. So it's like,
sure,
why not, man? As long as
yeah,
people are into it. I mean, if I announced it, I'm like, all right, pre-order everyone, you know, and nobody's into it, then it's like, well, I guess nobody wants this, so I'm not gonna kick my own ass for like years trying to make
yeah,
something that's perfect if nobody cares, you know?
sure. And I mean, I'll tell you the same thing that I tell my listeners. If you don't like me or you don't want to hear my voice again, you want me to go away because of something that I did or said to you, just hit unsubscribe and I go away forever.
Yeah.
I'm just gone. You know what I mean? It's never even a factor. People don't have to follow you on socials. They don't have to follow you on any of the stuff. They don't have to follow you on Patreon. They don't have to. And if you're part of the Patreon and you feel ripped off or whatever, unsubscribe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Or
one of those
I mean,
like,
I've taken it one step further. I've put this out there to people and I stand on this. Like, come in, pay $10 and get into the content. And if you feel like it's not worth the subscription, hit me up. I'll give you your $10
yeah,
back.
yeah.
I haven't had anyone do that, but
No, you put content out at an astonishing rate that actually makes me jealous because it takes me forever. Well, because I did audio podcasts for so many years.
yeah.
And then it was back in like November when I started making YouTube videos and like real YouTube videos, not just like me sitting there talking for a half hour and no cuts or edits. I was like, what do I got to do? I got to throw B-roll footage in. I've got to throw in all of this
Oh, it's production.
every 6 seconds. And I had to figure out how to do all of that stuff myself in November.
Hmm.
I was like, if I want this to work, this is how I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because like every now and again you'll say in the chat like, yeah, what are you guys up to? And I'm all like, I'm procrastinating on doing a video. And like it's just one of those weird things where I think that it's easy to hate. Um, but I also think that a lot of the times people don't realize how much work goes into it
Yeah, that
and
was the
how
main
much.
motivation for doing the Patreon was like, hey, I want you guys to participate in this with me so you can understand like all that goes into this and all the thought and all the strategy and all the time and you know what I mean. And I think like that adds value, when you
Oh
can
yeah.
see that, and that's the end of the day. Like that's the battle I always want to fight. Is like, how do we ascribe more value to just music and art in general? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Well, that's a good place to wrap here, man. You got any
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, I mean, I think we talked about everything. That was it's funny because people are like, what do you, he's inviting you on. What do you want to talk to you about? I was like, I have no idea. I was like, it's either, because like I had my Omni book out. I was like, if he's going to start pulling up specific Omni lyrics, I'm going to have to look them up or I'm going to have to pull up my old scripts and stuff. It's kind of funny when I did that first Omni episode. I
Good job on
remember,
this. I really like
oh,
this.
thank you. Thank you. I stayed up all night and did that one and then realized I pronounced the word belfry wrong. And I said bell
I
fry.
I almost did that
Yeah.
initially, and then I figured it out. On the record, it's Belfry.
Yeah.
So it's on the fence. And
Well,
then
and
I
that's what
heard
I was
somebody,
kind of following. Yeah.
yeah, and then I read the pronunciation. I was like, oh, it's Belfry.
Well, what was so weird about Omni is I'm still on, even though I quit my successful podcast and went off on my own to do whatever I'm doing now. I still get all of the press stuff. I still get the
No, yeah,
hey,
yeah, yeah.
and so I remember the company sent me a message. So I actually got Omni like way before anybody else did, when it went out in the
Nice.
press junket or whatever. And so I listened to it and I read the press release or whatever. And I even put in for an interview with the like to set up an interview. And I
Oh, with our
remember
publicist.
I remember it being weird because we scheduled it. I had a link and everything like ready to go. I had asked off work for it because I was like, this is going to be crazy, And then like the publicist got back to me and was like, "Oh yeah, no, we can't do it." And I remember for like just half a second being like, "Does he not want to talk to me?" And then, but then like after I really thought that, then I sent you an email and I was like, "Check out this thing that I'm making." And you're like, "Oh, cool, awesome." And I was like, "No, he's cool." I think ultimately it came down to they were just like, "Yeah, he's a small podcast we've never heard of before."
Oh,
And
okay.
I intentionally try not to evoke the name of the old podcast for clout. You know what I mean? I don't. Whenever I made a break, it was a very like burn the ships
Is
kind
it the
of.
dungeon one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I
And
don't. I don't remember.
yeah, no, I think they handle a lot of that stuff. More than likely, what happened inside baseball for industry, more than likely, what happened is another podcast expressed interest that probably had larger download numbers than me and had a larger social media presence. That's literally their job, is to
Right.
find the best way to promote, for their customer.
Was this
And
on
so
part one or part two?
it's part one.
I did a lot more press for part one.
Yeah,
Maybe it was a conflicting thing,
it probably was. Like I said,
or
like,
maybe they emailed me about it and I missed it or something. I don't know.
well, so
We're doing it now.
yeah, when you talk about like, oh, sometimes I struggle with being too hard on myself, or maybe acting a certain way and not realizing how it affects people. My big weakness is taking stuff the wrong way.
Oh, I got
you
you.
know and
Yeah.
then it'll take me a little bit of time to be all like, no, actually, you know what, this probably had nothing to do with me at all. That's really the final thought. But yeah, those Omni ones, it's funny because that episode, I wanted to get the first Omni one review
Mm.
out on the internet. I was the first podcast that released an Omni, because I was asking the publicist. I was all like, when is the earliest that I can drop this?
Hmm.
And he's like, oh, it has to be like, I think it was like, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks or something before the actual release of the record.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, that's actually really, 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 really soon. So I stayed up that night. I typed up a 4,000 word script,
Jeez,
recorded
dude.
it,
You're
realized that I
crazy.
sent it to my friend Buddy, the guy that originally got me into the band, and I
Hmm.
let him listen to it. And he's like, dude, it's really good. You're not saying Belfry the right way. And I was like,
Oh, he said
what?
that? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, he's a good friend. Like I said, he'll point stuff out, you know. Um, and so it's funny if you go back and listen to that episode. Every single time I say Belfry, it's said in like this deadpan monotone sound, because I've obviously just gone in and punched it in, for every time. So I was like, when the Belfry speaks, it was just, I don't know, really, really silly. Um,
Nice.
and then the part two one, I loved doing those episodes, but the part two one, I recorded that entire video in an evening, like 10 o'clock after my kids went to bed.
Hmm.
Came downstairs the next morning to edit it and realized that the video was all glitched out. It
Oh,
hadn't
did you have
recorded
to
properly.
re-record it?
Yeah, so I sat there. I wasn't even dressed up. I didn't have like my stuff on. I didn't done my hair or anything. So like, I love that everybody loved that video, and I'm like, oh my god, I look terrible in that video. Like, I'm just like, I look like I just woke up. I was like, hey guys, so Omni Part 2, am I right? Am I right? What do you dudes think about Omni Part 2? Yeah, so like, it's just all that like funny behind the scenes stuff that I think it's just really cool that people are able to connect like this, have real conversations like this. Um, I don't know. It just sort of reminds me of like how big the world really is and how we've all got our own stuff going on, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that ultimately is how lines get crossed, the way that they have been,
Yeah.
historically. So it's just interesting. It's something to think about.
Well, I
But
appreciate you, Daniel. Let's do this
yeah,
again. Good man. Good talking to you. I'm so stoked that the whole thing just kind of came around.
yeah,
And I think it's a cool, I don't know, cool example to people that it is possible to reconnect and work things out no matter what the issue is. And I like being a proponent of that sort of thing. And I hope people dig the episode.
yeah, yeah, 100%. I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see the whoa. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch this. I can't believe it's these guys talking. Like,
Right on.
no, it's really cool, and I'm really honored that you asked me to be on. It's really cool.
Yeah, dude. We'll keep supporting.
Absolutely.
All right, Doug.
Absolutely.
Have a
All right,
great
man.
rest of your night.
Yep, you too.
See you, man.